The James River is we like to call it America's founding river because that's exactly what it is. It was the first permanent English settlement in the kind of the New World. So it really started the nation.
The story of the James River is a tremendous one, and it's one we love to share.
Well, everybody knows 1607. That's the kind of prime date of when the settlers came to Virginia as well as the James River. Some things that they saw when they got here is definitely very different from what we would recognize today. It was very, very pristine. Basically imagining the most beautiful forests and riverbanks and shorelines that you can imagine, as well as an abundance of wildlife, is basically, the beautiful Virginia James River that we can imagine in our heads is what they saw when they got here.
The history that you find on the James, I think, is so important to us as Virginians, being that it is, the largest self-contained river in the United States. I mean, we have a 340-mile natural resource that is the James River running directly through our state.
We are about 2.5 miles east of the city of Richmond and the fall line of the James River, and that is an area where there are many, many rapids, rocks. The transition from the Piedmont into the Tidewater regions in Virginia happens right here. Right behind me here, going around the bend and up to the city of Richmond, where you can see that beautiful Richmond skyline, was an impassable block for those early settlers and discoverers. So settling further up here, they might have run into issues with American Indians or other obstacles that didn't allow them to settle here.
The Native Americans had a really special relationship with their rivers. The rivers were really the focal point.
The James River is home to a number of Indian tribes, including the Chickahominy tribe and Monacan tribe. And Captain John Smith encountered Native Americans during his voyages of the Chesapeake Bay watershed and was actually captured by Native Americans at Bottoms Bridge.
The Native Americans have suffered so much through our history as well, and they're trying to regain a lot of connections that they had historically, and there's such rich culture and history and connection to the river, and we really need to learn from that.
We're standing along the docks that used to be made of wood and which used to service the slave trade. This is the beginning of the slave trail.
The James River here is one reason Richmond is the second biggest domestic slave market of the United States, next to New Orleans.
The first slave boat came here, and it gave rise to the saying, being sold down the river. That river is the James River.
Once people arrived here, they would arrive in an environment they were fully unfamiliar with, a language they couldn't understand, an environment and climate they weren't used to. They would arrive and be brought along the river up through the city.
This revealing of lost history regarding slavery, that Richmond was the center for the export of human beings for 40 years, from 1820 to 1860. And it was all lost, and it was revealed by the research from volunteers and the labor.
Lumpkin's Jail, otherwise known as the Devil's Half Acre, I think we find up the hill along Broad Street and 14th Street, around where the African burial grounds are, and Lumpkin's Jail would have been the last part of the slave trail where incoming enslaved African Americans would go there to wait for auction.
So while it was a conduit for the slave trade, it was also the pathway to freedom for those slaves that paddled across the mouth of the James to Fort Monroe and really took the first steps toward emancipation that was declared by President Lincoln.
In Richmond, it's important to remember there was always a significant population of free African Americans, and that when we think about our history, we don't need to think of people all being descended from enslaved ancestors, but that there were people that were moving throughout the city, that were helping the city's economy, that were building the city's infrastructure, and that are the reason that the city is the way it is today. Behind me, you see a statue commemorating bateau boatmen who navigated boats across the James River during the later halves of the 18th and early half of the 19th century. Bateau boatmen were predominantly free African Americans or enslaved African Americans, and they would man 5 to a boat and successfully carry tobacco products, later on cotton products, and other kinds of industrial goods to and fro to the south side of the river, what was then called Manchester. Behind me far, you can see the Richmond flag, and the Richmond flag is a Bateau boatman surrounded by 9 stars. The 9 stars represent the 9 states that were eventually carved out of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Well, there are many factors that contribute to decline in ecosystem health and watershed health altogether. And a lot of that has to do with early agricultural practices using pesticides and fertilizers that can easily diminish the health of the river, as far as pollution and sediment and just overall land use that really impacts the river. So as a result of a lot of that destruction, species that we know today as kind of that historical charismatic species of the James, like the Atlantic sturgeon, as well as the bald eagle, are definitely 2 species that we've seen kind of coming back to a status of recovering their populations on the James River, as opposed to those huge, vast, abundant numbers that have been recorded since the early 1600s.
In the middle of the 20th century, the pesticide DDT was used throughout the United States and North America, and it had an impact on bald eagle eggs. And not only bald eagles, a lot of birds that call the James River home.
Human development over the past 200 years has been what's contributing to the decline of the health of the James River.
In 60s and 1970s, the Allied Signal Company and Hopewell developed an insecticide called Kepone, and the waste from that insecticide was dumped into Bailey Creek near Hopewell and went downriver in the James River. And in the mid-1970s, scientists determined that the pesticide was detrimental to the health of the James River, and it actually resulted in a shutdown of the fishing in the James River.
One of the big issues up on the upper James is cattle accessing the river. There's a lot of farmers aren't fencing their cattle in, so there's issues with that in terms of runoff, in terms of erosion, destroying all those riparian buffers that are really necessary for the health of the water.
Farmers have traditionally used the river to water their cattle, especially in the warmer months.
Yeah, so I think, a lot of people will have different feelings about the river than anyone else. The river is to anyone, it's going to be different. Whether you learned, your parents took you down there as a kid and you learned how to fish on the river, you're going to fall in love with the river for different reasons. And then with that, once you fall in love with something, you want to protect it. So the more people we can get out on the river, I think the more people are going to really want to protect that and fall in love with it, much like we see a lot of people starting to.
The James River Association was founded in 1976, so the year of our nation's bicentennial here on America's founding river. The James River, when the James River Association was founded, was really one of the most polluted rivers in the whole country. It was shut down to any kind of fishing for 13 years, and I don't know of any other river in the whole country that was subject to that level of restriction. But now we've made some substantial progress to the point now where the river is looked upon as a huge economic driver and asset and important to the quality of life for communities up and down the river.
Well, the James River Association contributes to a great amount of conservation efforts, including watershed restoration, which really involves proper land use as it relates to the river. So promoting actions like building up riparian buffer zones, as well as preventing stormwater runoff are 2 big factors that we pay attention to here in the city of Richmond, as well as a lot of the other major cities that impact the river.
So I think it's a good example for the nation to see how we can make improvements for fresh water, and the fact that fresh water is a natural resource that we're running out of, not even just as Virginians or as Americans, but as a population as a whole worldwide is a scary thing that we're going to have to start dealing with, and we have an amazing large amount of it right here in the state of Virginia.
The JRA has a program called the Cow-Free James, and we work with farmers to fence cattle out from the river in an effort to restore those riparian buffers. In addition to our riparian buffer restoration work, we encourage landowners to protect their land by placing it in conservation easements, which protects it from development.
We contribute by supporting other initiatives around the watershed, including building up the Captain John Smith Trail, which is an initiative put on by the National Park Service, and that is intended to preserve all of the historical aspects, landmarks, places that might have been forgotten throughout history, but are a big, big part of the river that we know today.
The State of the James is JRA's biennial report card for the James River, and in 2013 we graded the James River a C, which was a slight improvement from 2009 and definitely improvement from the mid-2000s when the first State of the James was released. We're seeing great improvements in wildlife habitat for birds, especially bald eagles and blue heron, but we're not seeing a lot of improvement in sediment pollution. And sediment pollution continues to be a hamper to fish habitat, especially the Atlantic sturgeon, which requires a rocky bottom to spawn, and submerged aquatic vegetation, which requires a clear river for sunlight to penetrate through.
The idea of the James River expedition came to us originally as wanting to have something that showed the connection of the James River from the very head of the James up in the Allegheny Mountains all the way down to the mouth at the Chesapeake Bay. And so what better way to do that than to get students from different sections of the watershed and have them traverse all 340 miles, but also an opportunity to engage communities and different stakeholders along the way.
We wanted to reach more people. We wanted to build a trip to where we could take students out of the classroom during the summer and get them to experience the James. It was a huge undertaking, which turned out to be an amazing success. We are doing water quality testing every day on the trip. Especially on the upper James, we're looking at farmers and kind of how they use the water. I think the big thing to educate people and to share the love for the water is you got to get out on it. You know, you can learn about the James in textbooks and watch documentaries and films and all that kind of stuff, but until you get out on the water and really get out on the water and spend a day or a couple days spending some time out on the river, that's what's going to make you fall in love with it.